To another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today we are going to do a quick little section of this book, Anarchy Works. We're in chapter 7, talking about, um, goodness, I forgot what the chapter is called. Let's see, neighboring societies. Yes, yes. In the last section, we talked about how these societies might be able to defend themselves from authoritarian regimes and things like that. It was a great chapter, great chapter. Excuse me. And it was good to like kind of I really love when these things go into history because history is the greatest example of real things that happened, right? And they talked about power society, um as well as these other places that were very successful with controlling, like the Seminoles and things like that, were very successful with being able to defeat, or at least fight back, against other authoritarian. And the main ways they failed was not necessarily due to purely military power, but due to things like lack of information, being overly tolerant to these authoritarian regimes and things like that. Lack of solidarity. That's probably the biggest thing, is lack of solidarity, and a lot of that is due to lack of communication or information, not knowing other people that are doing this similar type of struggle, right, against these authoritarian regimes and things like that. So being able to know who all is in the struggle, and then being there for them, being able to support them, is a huge step in the right direction. So this section, we're going to talk, what will we do about societies that remain patriarchal or racist. um Oh shoot, and I forgot to update the little title thing here. Let me do that real quick. Boom, bam. Oh, did not copy over. I want this one. All right. Boom, bam. Thank you, ma'am. Next. Doing this live. So I thought I checked everything, but I always be missing stuff. Okay. And my title of the stream should be accurate. Okay. So let's just jump into it, shall we? Shout out to Narc. I love that dude. Um, All right. Anarchism emphasizes autonomy and local action, but it is not an isolationist or provincial tendency. Anarchist movements have always concerned themselves with global issues and distant struggles. While governments also profess concern about problems in other parts of the world, anarchism is distinguished by its refusal to impose solutions. Statist propaganda claims we need world government to liberate the peoples of oppressive societies, even as the UN, NATO, the US, and other institutions continue to foster oppression and engage in warfare to uphold their hierarchical world order. Well said, well said. This is something I see with a lot of socialist groups as well. Is this ideology that you need, this new world order or whatever to I don't know if they're trying to reclaim that name or something. I don't know, but that you need this like central government to protect the rights of everybody else in order to ensure everybody else has democracy and stuff like that. But in reality, what happens is whenever you have this centralization of power, right, it centralizes power, and so it creates the exact same problems or even worse sorts of problems. This is why anarchy is so powerful, because it's about decentralizing power, distributing power, so that as many people as possible all have a little bit of power, and therefore there is no imbalance, right? What people don't understand, especially when people are, oh, anarchy is going to descend into strongmen, stuff like that, is that the simple fact, right, is that today is the strong man, right? Today's politics is all about the strong man, the person with the most might, the most power, and all this other stuff. And so, when we realize this and distribute that power evenly, then it'll be way harder for any big man, strong man, despotism, authoritarian stuff to even crop up in the first place. So once again, I'm stressing this point because it's really important here. It's like our current world is one ruled by authoritarianism. It's not ruled by democracy, right? It's democracy in name only. It's not democracy, it's authoritarianism by its very definition, because there are authorities in power over the vast majority of people. All right. Anyways, let's continue. Anarchist approaches are both local and global, premised on autonomy and solidarity. If a neighboring society were patriarchal or racist or oppressive in some other way, an anarchist culture would offer a range of possible responses beyond apathy and liberation by force. In all oppressive societies, one can find people fighting for their own freedom. It is much more realistic and effective to support such people, letting them lead their own struggles rather than trying to deliver liberation the way a missionary delivers good news. Ah, another well said, Peter Gelderloop. Well said, beautifully said. It's like we have this idea that we need to free people for them to experience freedom, whatever. But in reality, most people know when they're oppressed, right? The biggest problem for oppressed people is not, freeing themselves, is when they think they're not oppressed, like here in America, where we think we're the land of the free and all this other stuff. When in reality, we have terrible healthcare, terrible, living standards, terrible internet, you have so many terrible things. And we think we're so good and so great. But really, most of us are fairly oppressed. If you're not rich, if you're not a millionaire, you're probably oppressed in some way, right? And that goes for white people too. Granted, I would say, people of color and LGBTQ people and women are more oppressed or oppressed in different ways and stuff like that. But if you don't have, if you're not a millionaire, if you're not a millionaire white guy, you're probably oppressed in some way. Right. And so the biggest problem, right, for liberation is not trying to go and liberate people who, don't want to be liberated, who can't liberate themselves, but is supporting people who realize that they're oppressed and want, to fight. Right. And so the help, right, or the kind of goal of anarchists is not to go and deliver freedom for people, but to go and help people who are already, delivering their own freedom, being solidarity with them, right? If they ask for help, then go ahead and help them. If not, then you need to listen, right? Maybe they have a good reason for it. Let's continue. When Emma Goldman, Alexander Berkman, Molly Steimer, and other anarchists were deported from the US to Russia and discovered the oppressive state created by the Bolsheviks, they spread information internationally to encourage protests against the Bolsheviks and support for the many anarchists and other political prisoners. They worked with the anarchist Black Cross, a political prisoner support organization with chapters internationally that supported political prisoners in Russia and elsewhere. On several occasions, the international support and solidarity they organized press. I don't know what they're doing over there. One second. Sorry, y'all. I don't know what they're doing over there. Messing with the dog. Dog begging for food, I guess. We just fed him. It's a toss up when you take a dog off the street. If they're going they're gonna acclimate. But let's continue. Did I finish this one? Support political prisoners. I don't know if I finished. Let's go back again. They work with the anarchist Black Cross, a political prisoner support organization with chapters internationally that supported political prisoners in Russia and elsewhere. On several occasions, the international support and solidarity they organized pressured Lenin to temporarily suspend the repression he was levying against his political opponents and to release political prisoners. The anarchist Black Cross, originally called the Anarchist Red Cross, formed in Russia during the failed revolution of 1905 to aid those persecuted in the government reaction. In 1907, international chapters formed in London and New York. The international solidarity they mobilized helped keep anarchist prisoners alive and enabled others to escape. The result was that in 1917, the revolutionary movement in Russia was stronger, enjoyed more international connections, and was better equipped to overthrow the Tsarist government. Beautiful. The Revolutionary Association of Women of Afghanistan, founded in Kabul in 1977, has struggled for women's liberation against the violence of Islamic fundamentalists, as well as against occupation by regimes like the USSR, which was responsible for assassinating the founder of Aurora in Pakistan in 1987, RAWA. After fighting the Soviet occupation and the Taliban, they went on to oppose the Northern Alliance that came into power with the US backing. Through a series of desperate situations, they remained steadfast in their conviction that liberation can only come from within. Even amidst the oppression of the Taliban, they opposed the U.S. invasion in 2001, arguing that if Westerners really wanted to help liberate Afghanistan, they had to support Afghan groups fighting to liberate themselves. Exactly. Their predictions have proved sound, as Afghan women face many of the same oppressions under the U.S. occupation as they did under the Taliban. Or Taliban? Think about that for a second. Right? Think about that. According to RARA or RWA, RWA believes that freedom and democracy can't be donated. It is the duty of the people of a country to fight and achieve these values. Ooh, let's say that again. Freedom and democracy can't be donated. It is the duty of the people of a country to fight and achieve these values. That's snaps right there. That's great. That's great. So I might leave it off there. Do I have time? I think I have time. Oh, never mind. This is a long section. Um I'll continue. What a all right. What will prevent constant warfare and feuding? In state of society, the crisis of warfare has led to a pursuit of unified government at higher and higher levels, ultimately towards world government. This effort has clearly been unsuccessful. After all, war is the health of the state, exactly. But success within this model is not even desirable. It is a global occupation, not a global peace, that a world government strives for. Ooh, great, great call out. To take the example of Palestine, because it is here that the technologies and methods of control are developed that are later adopted by the US military and governments around the world. The occupation only flares up into visible war once every few years, but the occupiers are constantly fighting an invisible war to preserve and extend their control. With the use of the media, the schools, the criminal justice system, traffic systems, advertisements, minute policies, surveillance, and covert operations. It is only when the Palestinians fight back in a war that cannot be ignored breaks out that that the United Nations and the humanitarian organizations jump into action, not to right past and ongoing wrongs, but to return the prior illusion of peace and ensure that these wrongs can never be questioned. Though with less intensity, the same invisible war is fought against indigenous nations, immigrants, ethnic minorities, poor people, workers, everyone who has been colonized or exploited. Yes, very much. And what's crazy is that now you can even see this on the kind of highest scale, right? Not maybe highest, but like with tech workers who are paid really well, basically petit bourgeois, bourgeoisie, however you say it, right? Like these tech workers are now experiencing a similar type of thing where, people are being laid off left and right for no reason, like Twitter getting bought and most of the people getting hired and say, oh no, please come back. And then, oh no, blah, blah, blah. And it's a mess, right? It kind of shows you like what happens when people don't have that solidarity, when people don't have that support in their different struggles, right? The labor unions and all this other stuff, combining with, you know, the I hate to use this word because it's so, you know, inflammatory these days, but like the kind of woke movements, right? The kind of movements of connecting with people who are from different, oppressed and different backgrounds and things like that. I put it like that because it's not about this person is having more freedoms than another. It's just being in solidarity with other people who are struggling, or other people who are just trying to live life, and these people in power are making it extremely difficult because they want to oppressed. They want to basically put their power. They think they're the ones that get to tell everybody else how to live and what they should do and how what they should like and all this other stuff. So it's just a mess. Let me stop talking. Just read. I got a lot to cover. In the stateless, small scale societies of the past, warfare was common, but it was not universal. And in many of its manifestations, it was not particularly bloody. Great point. Some stateless societies never participated in warfare. Exactly. Peace is a choice, and they choose it by valuing cooperative reconciliation of conflicts and nurturing behaviors. Other stateless societies that did engage in warfare often practice a harmless, ritualized variety thereof. right? Many people don't realize this, right? It's like many of the kind of ritual combat, for instance, was basically a form of warfare, a form of, if you can say it, ethical warfare, right? Where instead of you trying to kill as many people from the other side as possible or do the most damage as possible, no, you take your strongest warriors and have them duel, right? Uh, and this sort of thing is, in my opinion, I think many people would say far more palatable, right? Far more um even enjoyable, right? It's good to look at because you get to see people's skills and everything like that. And at the same time, it's kind of a healthy outlet for these sorts of frustrations or this sort of competition or whatever you want to call it. So it's not that we don't, it's not like we can't have war at all. It's that the form of war matters, right? The form that people go to battle, the form that people engage in conflict matters. And that's what's very much ignored today. In some cases, the line between sporting event and warfare is unclear. As described in some anthropological accounts, teams of war parties from two different communities would meet at a pre-arranged place to fight. The purpose was not to annihilate the other side or even necessarily to kill anyone. Someone on one side would throw a spear or shoot an arrow, and they would all watch to see if it hit anyone before throwing the next spear. That's amazing. It reminds me of the game my brother and I used to play like when we were young. We have these big, like these metal sticks. I don't know where we got like a broken fence or something, and we would just throw it at one another and try to like catch it and stuff like that. Very silly game, but it was pretty fun. So really just trippy to see that here. Um, they would often go home after one person got hurt or even earlier. In warfare, as practiced by the Lakota and other Plains Indians of North America, it was more highly valued to touch an enemy with a stick, counting coup, than to kill him. Other forms of war were simply raiding, vandalizing, or stealing from neighboring communities, and often trying to get away before a fight broke out. If these sorts of chaotic fighting were the warfare of an anarchist society, how preferable would that be to the cold, mechanical bloodbath of the state? Exactly. See, and this is crazy too because it shows, like people talk about, oh, nuclear weapons is the biggest deterrent to war, but really no, weapons is the biggest threat to humanity, right? That can cause existential risk. Um, for a long time, warfare was not that bloody, right? Warfare was not that, crazy and wild. It was only when certain cultures started, creating guns to kill people rather than to have these ritualized war types. And I might even go so far as to say this might be a big reason. I'm not sure if there's studies on this, but this might be a big reason as to why a lot of indigenous cultures fell to the Europeans coming through, right? Because again, many of these types of warfares that he's talking about existed amongst the indigenous people, like Native Americans, people across Africa and stuff like that, who fought, these ritualized warfare. And so when they're going to war with another person or another nation or whatever, they're not expecting to be destroyed, right? They're not expecting to kill the other people. They're expecting to, have this kind of political back and forth, right? Have this skill of arms and all this other stuff. But when these colonizers came in with guns and was just like killing everybody, it just changed the whole field, right? It just kind of destroyed the culture and the rules of war, if you will. So I do wonder if that's a reason why, a big reason why, we kind of see how things played out. But societies that do not want to war with their neighbors can structure themselves to prevent it. Not having borders is an important first step. Often we can arrive at the truth by simply reversing the rationalizations of the state, and the line about borders keeping us safe can easily be decoded. Borders endanger us. If there is a social conflict, violence is much more likely to break out if there is an us and a them. Exactly. Clear social divisions and borders prevent reconciliation and mutual understanding and encourage competition and polarization. Very much so. Like this is another thing you see with indigenous cultures. Many of them did not even have names for their nations, right? For their nations, it was just a group of people who got along well, who had an idea, who had a shared culture, a language, or something like that. But the borders were so vague and non-existent, really, because they regularly kind of schismed. They regularly had this fractalish pattern where people would break off organically to form their own thing, and then they would come back into the group, and then would spread out again. It was kind of very fluid and organic, right? But when again, a lot of these colonizers just had this idea of this, oh, this is my land, set this border here and all this other stuff. It creates this idea of xenophobia, right? Xenophobia is not normal. It's not a default state of humanity, right? It's very much created by this idea of us and them, of strict borders. Even, yes, there has been studies. I want to say this real quick. There has been studies on, how us and them is a very deep part of the human psyche, how we can form an us and them kind of mindset with just the vaguest of things, with like, what colors you like or whatever, right? But it's very fluid as well. Like you can easily switch it up by saying, okay, now you like this color and I like the other color, and then you form it again. But now you realize, oh, I'm the blue group and I was the red group before, and vice versa, right? So it's very organic, it's very fluid, it's not set in stone, right? Yes, we can have we quickly have us and them mentalities, but we also allow it to switch places, right? This is why we even have this idea of empathy in the first place. If we didn't, if we weren't, the very fact that we have empathy shows that it's deep part of human psyche to switch sides, to switch your perspective, right? If we didn't have that, then we wouldn't have empathy. It wouldn't even be a big thing. It wouldn't even be such a common concept. So, yeah, it's these sorts of things is such a great thing to keep in mind. All right. Anarchist anthropologist Harold Barclay describes some societies in which each individual is connected to others through multiple overlapping networks arising from kinship, marriage, clan affiliations, and so on. We do have examples of anarchic polities among peoples, numbering in the hundreds of thousands and with fairly dense populations, often over 100 people to the square mile. Such social orders may be achieved through a segmentary lineage system, which, as we have seen, already has certain parallels to the anarchist notion of federalism, or, as among the Toga and some East African pastoralists, large populations may be integrated by a more complex arrangement with affiliates the individual with a number of cross-cutting and bisecting groups so as to extend his or her social ties over a wide area. And in other words, individuals and groups constitute a multitude of interconnected loci, which produces the loci, it's loci, right? Which produces the integration of a large social entity, but with an actual centralized coordination. A lot of words there. I'm not even going to go back over it. I'm wondering if I should stop here and more time, because I got to leave around 12:30 or so. But I have about 10-15 minutes. All right. In addition to this self-balancing property of cooperative societies, some stateless peoples have developed other mechanisms to prevent feuds. The Mardu Aborigines of Western Australia traditionally lived in small bands, but these periodically came together to hold mass meetings, where disputes between individuals or between different groups would be resolved under the eyes of the conflict. Wait, under the eyes of the whole society, goodness. And this way, protracted, unaccountable feuding could be avoided, and everyone was on hand to help resolve the conflict. The Concomba and the Nuer of Africa recognized bilateral kinship relationships, and overlapping economic relationships, insofar as everyone was related to everyone else. Exactly. There is no clear axis of conflict that might support warfare. A commonly helped up a commonly upheld cultural taboo against feuding also encouraged people to resolve disputes peacefully. Anthropologist E. Evans Pritchard described newer society as ordered anarchy. Amazing. Amazing. Think about that for a second, man, while I drink. So you see, there's a lot of organic movement around identities like that. A lot of interconnectedness, and in fact, you see this today with the internet, right? One of the biggest reasons why we have so much polarization on the internet today is because these companies, these organizations, and other interest groups try their hardest to demarcate people into these stringent um, buckets, right? Into this idea of left and right, or white or black, and this, that, and the other. Um, and it makes it so much easier to control people, right? Because you lack that solidarity, because you see the other as the enemy, and you find constantly find reasons and so on, basically to go to war with other people, and not a ritualized war, but a terrible, um quite frankly, bloody war, right? But online, where the rest, where they're kind of, instead of the goal being to test your skills and everything like that with another person, the goal is to destroy them, right? To debunk them, to completely alienate them or ridicule them and things like that. And that makes discourse extremely difficult, right? That makes um these sorts of things really really hard to remedy. And it's sad because you know I really worry that this is going to bubble out into like the real world. I mean, you already see it happening. Really, that's the biggest problem, right? Is that you already see this happening with a lot of people, um, on specific side. Let's say that are willing to take up arms and kill people in real life for kind of made up xenophobic ideas. So it's really really worrying, to say the least. The anarchist movement in today continues to fight against the borders that divide a capitalist world. The anti-authoritarian No Border Network, formed in Western Europe in 1999, has since become active throughout Europe and in Turkey, North America, and Australia. No Border efforts include support for illegal immigrants, education about the racism encouraged by government immigration policies, protests against government officials, actions against airlines to halt deportations, and no border camps spanning the borders of two countries. In the course of the campaign, participants have forcibly opened border crossings between Spain and Morocco, broken into a children's detention facility in the Netherlands to bring aid and open up communication, partially destroyed a detention facility, and sabotaged the companies involved in deportations in Italy, shut down a detention facility in Greece, and freed dozens of immigrants from a detention facility in Australia. So a lot of stuff there. I like this. They're doing a lot of work. Put in that work. No border camps bring people from many countries together to develop strategies and carry out actions. They often take place on the periphery of expanding force world zones, for example, in Ukraine, between Greece and Bulgaria, or between the US and Mexico. Common slogans at No Borders protests include No Border, No Nation, Stop Deportations, Freedom of Movement, Freedom of Residence, Right to Come, Right to Go, Right to Say, Right to Stay. Awesome. I love that. Anarchist societies encourage the free creation of overlapping networks between neighbors, communities, and societies. These networks may include material exchange, cultural communication, friendships, family relationships, and solidarity. There is no clear delineation of where one society ends and another begins, or what the sides will be in a conflict. When there is a feud, the feuding parties are likely to have many social relationships in common, and many third parties will be caught in the middle. In a culture that emphasizes competition and conquest, they may still take sides and offset the possibility of reconciliation. But if their culture values cooperation, consensus, and social connectedness, and their economic relationships reinforce these values, they are more likely to encourage mediation and peace between the feuding parties. They might do so out of a personal desire for peace, because of a concern for the well being of the people involved in the fight, or out of self interest, as they also depend on the health of the social networks in question. In such a society, self interest, community interest, and ideals enjoy a greater confluence than in our own society. This is great stuff, y'all. This is great. And larger arrays or more diverse populations, in which a commonly held cultural ethos and spontaneous conflict resolution may not suffice to protect against serious conflicts, multiple societies can create intentional federations or peace pacts. One example of an anti authoritarian peace pact with greater longevity than most treaties between states is a confederation enacted among the Haudenosaunee, often referred to as the Iroquois League. The Haudenosaunee are comprised of five nations that all speak similar languages in the northeastern part of the territory appropriated by the United States, and the southern parts of what are now considered to be the Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec. Yeah, I heard a lot about the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee. They have a lot of great stuff. The Confederation was formed around August 31st, 1140, It covered a geographically huge area, considering that the only options for transportation were by canoe and on foot. The Haudenosaunee was sedentary agriculturalists who lived with the highest population densities, averaging 200 people per acre of any inhabitants of the Northeast until the 19th century. That's a long time to be the highest. And this is like again, this is leading up to the 19th century. So New York was driven by that time. Remember, New York was fairly small, right, for a city, even though it was the biggest, colonial city or kind of European city in America. It was less dense than these Haudenosaunee folks for a long time. Think about that. Communal farming land surrounded walled towns. The Five Nations involved Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. Had a long history of infighting, including wars spurred by competition for resources. The Confederation was hugely successful in ending this. By all accounts, the Five Nations, and later a sixth, the Tuscarora, who fled English colonization of the Carolinas, lived in peace for over 500 years, even throughout the genocidal European expansion and trading of guns and alcohol for animal pelts that caused so many other nations to split or war with their neighbors. The Confederation finally fractured only temporarily during the American Revolution due to different strategies about which side to support to mitigate the effects of colonization. Amazing. The communal economic life of the Five Nations played an important role in their ability to live in peace. A metaphor often used for the Federation was bringing everyone to live together in the same longhouse and eat from the same bowl. All the groups of the Federation sent delegates to meet together and provide a structure for communication, conflict resolution, and discussing relationships with neighboring societies. Decisions were made using consensus, subject to approval by the entire society. Awesome. And yeah, don't get me wrong. As a germaphobic person, the idea of eating out the same bowl as everyone else, no, no. But I do recognize that this is a very, very, very powerful kind of culture. And in fact, this is something that's still commonplace in many cultures today. Like I was looking up some folks of living in Africa today, and some kind of neighborhoods and communities still do this. But what I would like to do, I'll kind of remix this a little bit to have like you can make like that same big pot. Like my family, for instance, and a lot of Haitians, we have like these huge pots of rice that people make or soup or whatever. But like, and everybody eats from that pot, but like you have your own plate, right? Or you have your own bowl. So you scoop it out with the ladle or whatever, or big spoon, serving spoon, you put it on your own plate, right? So it's similar like Thanksgiving, but on the communal level, right? Like we do it. We used to do that at church all the time, and I know many other people probably do something similar, in their own cultures. So I think we should kind of bring this back in a lot of places, right? Like imagine being able to eat with your neighborhood. Like everybody in your neighborhood goes and cooks, every week or something like that. Cooks a big dinner for everybody in the neighborhood, right? Where everybody cooks their own things or whatever. Or some people cook this huge pot, for everybody else, and then you can take some serving out and putting in your own thing, so you know that the germs and everything like that, but it still has that camaraderie. It still encourages that companionship. I think that is sorely missing in a lot of the individualistic community or so-called communities, right? Nations and stuff like that, like here in America. So yeah, like I really like this idea as well. Let's finish this up. The anarcho-syndicalist movement, originating in Europe, has a history of creating international federations to share information and coordinate struggles against capitalism. These federations could be a direct precedent to global structures that facilitate living in peace and preventing warfare. The International Workers Association, IWA or AIT in Spanish, contains anarcho-syndicalist unions from about 15 countries on 4 continents, and it periodically holds international congresses, each time in a different country. The IWA was formed in 1922 and initially contained millions of members, although nearly all of its member unions were forced underground or into exile during World War II. It has since regenerated and continues to meet. I gotta check that out. So next time we'll finish off chapter 7 with networks, not borders. I'm really excited about. I like that. I like that title. But yeah, this was great. This was great. 2 sections here. Thanks as always for listening, for watching with me, and let me know what you learned, what you got from this, what you agree with, disagree with, whatever. Let's have a conversation. And yeah, that's it. Have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.